run critiques a lot better is that say that they have impacts on the policy arena. Don't just like distinguish them to two completely separate realms. Brandon, what's up?
Sorry, you answered.
You got it? Okay, cool.
I've also heard it mentioned that you could call it, or, and I think it's right, that you can say that it's not fiat and fiat, rather than pre-fiat and post-fiat.
What do you mean by not fiat and fiat?
So I think there are arguments that operate completely outside the realm of fiat.
But like, my argument is that what I was saying earlier about that everything is subject to criticism in the debate round. From the moment somebody starts talking to the moment they end is subject to criticism. So distinguishing, at no point in that is it easy to indicate where fiat happens in that affirmative speech. And so I guess the concept of saying it comes before or after fiat is just an arbitrary way of sequencing arguments. So
right, but I don't want it to be temporal. I just want to say if something is linked to something that is not fiat, they can't use arguments that are couched in fiat.
oh, for example, if you said the word mankind in your speech, and I'm like, I'm going to talk about the mankind word,
right.
all of your reasons about why you saw the nuclear war don't impact this argument.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a fair way of explaining it, but I don't think that I think that's a way of distinguishing that your advantage scenarios that you're talking about don't impact this argument. Just say that. That seems a lot easier way of saying it than we're trying to provide this arbitrary distinction between fiat and post-fiat. Just say that the link is separate from the area of your advantages, so there's no reason why you can claim them as a response to this criticism. That seems like easier than trying to make that distinction. Bad arguments against the K. William Bennett, Janice Caldwell. And a lot of people have used this NFA-LD part of the resolution as a means to limit out critiques. According to NFA-LD rules, the negative may present one counterproposal, which I guess that's where you could call your alternative, specific to the affirmative problem area. By this, we mean the counterproposal must deal with the problem area defined by the affirmative and not the form of government, economic system, or need for further study. A lot of people say that you can't run critiques because they critique the government system or the economic system. That I don't know what the normal government system or economic system, but I guess it would be whatever we call ours. But this caveat right here, I really like it, unless specifically identified as a key issue in the resolution. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in context of Cuba later, but I think the unless word means that it's going to be identified as a key issue in the resolution. So we're going to have our K. So we'll talk about this a little more, but I don't think that this limits out any type of language arguments. I think they're exclusive to this argument, but just be careful that whenever you run arguments that are about, say, communism or socialism, and people try to throw this rule at you, I think that the unless identified part of the area is a caveat and a loophole that makes you be able to run this. What's up?
But you do think the critique is a counterproposal then?
If you have an alternative.
Okay.
Probably. I mean, I would assume that that's where you would get your ability to run that type of argument. I think that the language is not clear enough, and so if for some reason people are saying critiques aren't allowed in NFA-LD, that you could fit it under this area. According to William Bennett, critiques discourage research on the topics and decrease the variety of cases and attacks and substitute in their place an increased emphasis on deconstructing ideas and language. What? First, there's no warrant in this argument for discouraging topic-specific research. Like I said earlier, ethics inform politics. Ask Bush. I guarantee you, a lot of his ethics inform his political decisions. And two, there's not an impact in this argument to an increased emphasis on deconstructing language and ideas. It just says that it shifts the focus. In fact, law and policies are all deconstructible. Justice is not. It's in the name of justice that we construct. That's Derrida. And what's up?
Didn't you write this for high school LD?
What?
Didn't you write this for high school LD?
High school LD? No. Policy. I would assume.
I think he wrote it for high school LD, because it wasn't a high school.
His argument about, and Caldwell's extension of his argument are just in general arguments against critiques. And if this was written for LD, I have no idea why you would limit out ethics and deconstruction in a value type of thing. Another argument against criticisms is that there's a reduced pedagogical value of debate. The constructive and more encompassing nature of policy clash increases discussion of multiple ideas and is more educationally worthwhile. I think that assumes a lot. I don't understand why you can't have clash over other issues. I think that if you're not willing to have clash over the idea of your economic system or your government being good or bad, then one, you're just excluding a part of the resolution that mandates somebody affirm one or two of those things. And second, you're assuming that we can't have competitive policy type arguments about why a government is good or bad. Those debates exist in the real geopolitical world. We have different forms of government. Our government is phenomenally different than Cuba's, it's different than China's, it's different than Switzerland's. We all have different ideologies for what the government is. And remember what I said about thinking. Thinking is important when it comes to these type of things, and so is critical thinking. So you should keep that in mind when you're making these type of theory arguments against K's. Wrong form. High school policy debaters usually tell K debaters to go to LD. And so I guess college LD debaters could tell college K debaters to go to Red Crit or something like that. I don't really know what this argument means. It's kind of arbitrary and really probably does more violence to people when you tell them that what they're talking about doesn't matter. I really think the wrong form argument's kind of silly. Janice Caldwell coached Lindell High School, and she published an article, Responses to Her Critique in the Rostrum, and this is also known as an awful, unwarranted, silly responses case. This is her argument first. A, it does not specifically critique our case, but all cases in general. This is actually one argument that I'm moderately sympathetic to. I think that it's better when criticisms deal more explicitly with things like language, advantage areas, disadvantage structures, as opposed to the resolution. But there are some parts of resolutions that justify and that change every year that justify resolutional-based criticisms. For example, my junior year, we had a topic that involved sanctions on China or increasing economic pressure on the PRC. And there were a lot of criticisms that referred to the nature of sanctions and the effect they had on populace. I think those sanctions, while yes, they applied to every case on the resolution, were still subjects of debate. You have to, if you're going to defend that we should increase economic sanctions on China, you should probably defend the ethics or the morality behind those said policy options. So, her second argument is that critiques are too generic, originating of thought and clash becomes less important, policy implications, contemporary knowledge of current events and recent history are no longer rewarded as debaters search for the most esoteric and obscure philosophical restaurants. I think that this kind of obscures a lot of what K's should talk about. I do think that there's new things that we should be talking about, and excluding ethics or those type of things from the debates just seems kind of an arbitrary distinction for me. Her third argument is solvency disadvantages and harms turns to causal link attacks and provide for valid debate. This critique does not do so. I don't even know what that means. I think that valid debate can happen in context of K debates, and these just seem like weird theory arguments to me that don't have any evidentiary support behind them. Her second argument is that critique is regressive, and it's based on a poor assumption. I don't know why it's a poor assumption or anything like that. You can't just make, I mean, what I'm trying to get here is that these are just generic theory arguments that cannot be ran against every critique. If you want to say that the critique is based off a poor assumption, you have to change that if the K is a language K, if the argument's a biopower argument, if it's a capitalism argument. If that's a poor assumption, you need to have specific evidence that says Foucault's idea about biopower is flawed for these few reasons, or Marx's theories about communism are not good for these few reasons. And so you should not just read generic theory blocks like this if you're not going to apply them specifically to things. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I thought that she talked a lot about how when you run a language critique or something, you may be assuming the intentionality of the speaker, and that's why it's so assumptive, is that you're trying to get in the head and then vote according to that.
Sure, but I think that, yeah, I think that's true. I think you need to establish a clear link. If somebody, there's a difference between accidentally saying something and immediately apologizing for it and then slamming a language K on them versus like you reading through a piece of evidence that refers to the word mankind in it and not challenging that assumption. If you just take to consider, if you just ignore and gloss over the fact that mankind has a particular history that ignores women's role in people